Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Tuesday, week 1 of the NFL season is in the books. It was good to have some action back in our lives, but Dennis, it's fair to say those games and some of those performances did not go as expected.
And was there any other game than Detroit?
There were many other games. You have a personal love of Detroit that worked out. I heavily invested in Detroit in our league. We were playing each other. That did not work out. I just invested in the wrong Lions. Apparently, the only one I needed was Jameson Williams.
No, I mean, overall, I watched a good amount of football this weekend. It was nice. It was week 1. I was loving it. And last night it was me and the boy watching as he was rooting for 25 points out of Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson to beat his aunt in our listener league. He did not get it. He only got 21 points out of that duo. But I went 10-6 in my money line picks, which I thought was pretty good. Too bad I didn't bet it. And then I also placed in a $3.3 million draft FanDuel contest as well. Placed in the money. I mean, I only won $8, but
hey, you placed in the money.
I placed in the money, and it was a free ticket I got too. So
I felt pretty good. I went 12-4 in our picks last week. That's an 80% clip to start off. Wasn't too bad despite some very interesting results. But let's dive in. We talked about the opener last week, but we are going to cover the rest of the 15 games that were played on the week 1 slate, and then we will end by taking a look at Thursday night football that is coming up. The first of those games,
chock full of stuff in this show.
Yeah, the first of those games kicked off as we were wrapping up on Friday, and that was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where the Philadelphia Eagles pulled off the 34-29 victory over the Packers. Thought it was a very good game. Packers had some good offensive moments, but near the tail end of that game with less than 10 seconds left, Jordan Love got wrapped up in a pile, went down. It looked pretty grim as they carried him off the field. It looked even grimmer when you realized Malik Willis was about to come in for him. We've had a couple of days now. They're saying an MCL sprain. Most estimates I've seen put that somewhere in the 3 to 6 week range. Matt LaFleur put that in the if he can't go this week, we will start Malik Willis range, which you got to have a good chuckle. And I guess it's too early to give up on the optimism. Dennis, they don't have the hardest matchup in the world this week. I believe they're hosting the Colts. But how are you feeling if it's not Jordan Love and is rather Malik Willis?
So as the grimmest who drafted Jordan Love in our listener league as my QB1, and we had a lot. It's our listener league Superflex. And so Malik Willis is what's on the waiver wire. There's been a lot of talk about, they're going to sign Ryan Tannehill. But all signs point to it being, on the 3-week end of the spectrum. So 2 or 3 games of Malik Willis. We'll see how it is. I mean, he had better numbers in preseason than Sean Clifford. So, I mean,
presumably that's why they made that upgrade.
I mean, he's got that going for him. Unfortunately, he's going to be running an offense that he's only been in for 2 weeks now, maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So the learning curve is going to be steep. Willis is pretty mobile, a little more so than Jordan Love. I feel like it's going to be a lean on Josh Jacobs series of games coming up. I'm cautiously optimistic that I'll get Jordan Love back and he'll be fine. But every receiver is getting a significant downgrade. It feels like we're going to be looking at 20 to 22 pass attempts per game. They're going to play slow. They're going to try to rely on their defense, make plays, and maybe it works, but it's not going to be great for fantasy.
Yeah, so Jacobs could play. Emmanuel Wilson might not be a bad flex this week. Jaden Reed, I think, who they still use in the running game, could have some. Here are the next 3 games. Let's say optimistically it's only 3 games. At home versus the Colts, which I think the bigger question for me is if Green Bay's defense can handle Indianapolis on the ground, because they did not appear to have a spectacular rush defense. Then at the Titans, which becomes much more fascinating.
Revenge game.
Much more fascinating based on everything. I guess I didn't realize they were the home team in Brazil. That's kind of a bummer for them. Then home for the Vikings on September 29th. If it lingered beyond that, at the Rams, home for the Cardinals, home for the Texans. So in their first, if it went the full 6 games, you're talking about the first 7 games. They have 6 of their home games, it looks like, in the first few weeks. That, I mean, is a double-edged sword to me.
So I can see them being 2-2 after 4 games. I think they can win. It feels like they can win one of these next 3 with Willis. After that, if it goes 6 games, it feels kind of like a 1-5 stretch, which is going to put them at 2-5 with a lot of ground to make up in the NFC North. But
the Packers were the road team in Brazil. I'm looking at it now. Eagles are listed as the home. They're both on ESPN. They're both listed as the home team, which
go ESPN.
Congratulations. So that makes it a little less bad.
I as a Packers fan, I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, hope for the best. Well, they didn't say it was a tear. Technically, a sprain is a slight tear. So we'll see. I could see him coming back after 3 games with some limited mobility, which is going to change the play style a little bit for him. But they've got a good wide receiver group, good tight end group. So potentially, we could see them kind of protecting him with the shotgun like Atlanta tried to do with Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I like how you use the word tried to, because that's pretty apt. On the other side, Saquon Barkley making his Eagles debut, 24 carries, had 109 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Involved in the passing game, they did a long touchdown pass to him, got 2 for 23, not a huge passing day. Still good days for A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Brown 5, 119, a touchdown, Smith 7 for 84. But do you like Barkley's fit here, and do you like his production going forward?
I like the fit based on 1 game. He outtouched Gainwell 26-2, but Hurts did still have 13 carries. I think if I'm the Eagles, I want to maybe drop that number a little bit more. So that might benefit Gainwell some, because I don't think they want Barkley with 24 carries a game, 26 touches a game. But I could see Barkley dropping around 18 to 20 carries and the targets going up to 5 or 6. Probably the biggest opportunity is just that Hurts doesn't throw to the running back a ton. So that's going to be a scheme change for him. I think it feels like they kind of made this move with the intent of reducing the reliance on Jalen Hurts' running, but they still ran him 13 times, even though he only gained 2.5 yards a pop.
It looked like he scrambled a lot, honestly, in the kind of later drives when they were trying to make a comeback. I think that I don't know if they were all designed runs, but yep, something to watch. I was encouraged. It looked like in the goal line area they did do some traditional running plays with Saquon down there, which last year it seemed like it was either the tush push or a throw. So
yeah. I mean, and then it also, Goddard had 5 targets and 4 catches, so there may be some meat on the bone at the tight end position.
Moving on to the Sunday games. First game saw the Pittsburgh Steelers head into Atlanta, get the 18-10 victory. No touchdown, no problem. Justin Fields did indeed start as Russell Wilson was ruled out, but wore his complete uniform and pads on the sideline, which I thought it was illegal for them to be in full uniform if they were declared inactive.
Could he have been the emergency quarterback?
He was on their official list of inactives. That's where but he's a weird dude. Fields 17 of 23, 156 yards, no TDs, no INTs, 14 carries for 57 yards. Kind of a vanilla performance all the way around. Did have some good chemistry with Pickens, hit him 6 times. If you were a Jaylen Warren truther, you're probably crying a little bit. 2 carries for 7 yards and only 2 receptions for 13. But Mike Tomlin has said they're prepping Fields in case he has to go again this week. Would you just say no in case about it and stick with Fields at this point?
Well, I thought I saw that they were planning to start him this week again.
No, Tomlin said that they're prepping Justin Fields with the idea that he might have to start.
I mean, I would expect Tomlin's going to go back to Russ when he's healthy. Yeah. But I think Fields showed that the Steelers can win with him. And so I don't think Tomlin will be afraid to go back to him. I mean, the completion rate was 74%. And the 6.78 yards per attempt was just slightly below last year's league average. So, Fields can throw the ball down the field. The unfortunate thing is they just don't have a whole lot of receiving talent outside of George Pickens. So we'll have to see. I mean, Van Jefferson had 2 targets. Calvin Austin had 2 targets. And everything else outside of Pickens 7 went to the tight ends and running backs.
I will say, I think the concerns for Fields with Mike Tomlin as his head coach was he couldn't have the turnovers and sacks that he sometimes had in Chicago. He didn't have any turnovers, only 2 sacks. So I thought it was a decent performance in what was truly a hideous game to watch. And part of it being hideous was the return of Kirk Cousins. He took 0% of his snaps under center. I think a testament to his limited mobility coming back from his injury. He did not look like he was very comfortable even moving in the pocket. 16 of 26, 155 yards, did not have a lot of zip on the ball, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, did get sacked a couple of times. Rust, still injured, combination of both?
Well, I definitely think it's a combination of rust, the injury, like his injury. So how it differed from Rodgers was to his left Achilles and Cousins to the right Achilles. And that's the leg you push off on when you're throwing. So he doesn't quite have, I'm going to suspect that given how much later in the season it happened versus Rodgers, that there's still a lot of strength and confidence to be gained in that Achilles. You add in a new offense and new teammates and got to develop chemistry and being a little bit rusty. I think there's a lot of factors that are going into it. And so it's going to be growing pains for a few weeks. He may not get the zip back on his ball. And while he has an okay arm, he's not known for having, a Mahomes or Allen type of arm. Having his mechanics be clean is what's going to propel him. And so we may end up with a little bit of a lost season out of Kirk Cousins.
Something to watch for sure. Next up, we get to Buffalo, where the Bills were down pretty big in this game, but managed to come back for the 34-28 victory over the Cardinals. Dennis, for the Cardinals, we were pretty excited to see rookie Marvin Harrison Jr., but only 3 targets, only caught 1 pass for 4 yards. Worrying sign at all, or you think it's just kind of settling into a new season?
So I think he's a rookie. He had a bad drop. I think that, Kyler missed him at the 110 mark left in the game. He was wide open, would have been a walk-in touchdown. And there's been some reports that the route running Harrison exhibited in game 1 was a little bit less than crisp. So I think there's some, while you play in preseason isn't quite like regular season, and regular season isn't like the playoffs.
I don't even think he played in the preseason.
So he's got to get settled in, got to get the chemistry developed with Kyler. If I've got people in my leagues that want to dump him, I'll be more than happy to buy him at a discount. I think that if Murray had saw him on that that end of the game play, the line would have been a lot different. It would have been, let's see, two catches on 4 targets for only 45-ish yards, but a touchdown, and that would have, propped up the whole learning experience.
He only played 3 snaps in the preseason. I think we've seen a couple of these teams, the worst offender we have yet to get to, where they just decided not to play anyone in the preseason. Some of these week 1 performances looked rough. Hopefully he'll get back a little bit in the flow. They are at home against the Rams in week 2, so maybe a little bit of a better matchup. Let's hope he doesn't get the Amon-Ra St. Brown you don't exist treatment again. For the Buffalo Bills, they came from behind. We thought their passing game would be an interesting work in progress, and it really looked like that. Disappointing to see Dalton Kincaid only get a couple of targets, but most every pass catcher in there only had 2 or 3 targets. Keon Coleman ending up with 5. But the first passing touchdown of the season actually went to Mac Hollins, who was a guy that was one of the players that they added, who was kind of quietly had a great training camp, made that team, and looks like he might be a contributor. Do you have any interest in him as a guy you would like to roster on the low end?
On the low end, sure, maybe. And, I think that Hollins is going to. He's technically listed as the starter, but Coleman got the higher volume, and Khalil Shakir, he was very effective. And I don't think that Hollins and Curtis Samuel play the same type of game. Ultimately, they only threw 23 passes, and in those 23 passes, Josh Allen targeted 10 different receivers and had 9 different receivers catch passes. I think it's just kind of tough to build up, a lot of that, there with no Stephon Diggs there. Somebody's got to establish themselves to be that alpha. Right now, I don't think we know who it is. Could it be Keon Coleman? Maybe. Could it be Khalil Shakir? Maybe. Could it be Dalton Kincaid? Maybe. It feels like after seeing Kansas City year after year after year in the playoffs and having to face them, it almost feels like they went and got Kincaid to be their Travis Kelce. So we may see that develop over the next couple years. ultimately, it's a team that has a very wide funnel, and so it's hard to count on anybody, especially if Allen, like, they threw the ball a lot more last year. If he's only going to throw it 23 times, that's going to be an issue for fantasy.
Next up, we go to Chicago, where the Bears hosted the Titans. The Titans took a 17-0 lead, and the Bears came battling back thanks to an implosion by the Titans' offense and special teams that resulted in a bevy of turnovers, many from Will Levis, who had a fumble and 2 interceptions. But of interest for us in fantasy was the split in the backfield, which we thought would be a mostly even split, but we ended up seeing Tony Pollard with 16 carries turn that into 82 yards and a touchdown. Tyjae Spears only 4 carries for 21 yards. Pollard also saw 4 targets, caught 3 for 12. Spears did see 4 targets, but only caught 4 for 11. If you're rostering one or both of those backs, how are you feeling after week 1?
After week 1, I feel elated that I'm rostering Tony Pollard, but I expect it's going to level back out. It's a situation where Brian Callahan has told anybody that'll listen, we have 2 similar backs. They can both do pretty much the same things, and we're going to let them do those same things, and we'll see who gets hot. And if one of them gets hot, they're going to get more volume. Week 1, that was Tony Pollard. It could very easily be switched next week where instead of a 20-8 touch advantage for Pollard, it could be a 20-8 touch advantage for Tyjae Spears, which is going to be frustrating. So you can't really count on either of them as much more than a flex.
Meanwhile, for the Bears, a lot of hype for Caleb Williams' debut, and it was something. 14-29 for 93 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, did take a couple of sacks, one of which was horrendous. Only 5 carries for 15 yards. Week 1, but he's at home, not the most exceptional defense. What did you make of Caleb Williams' debut?
He sure looked like a rookie.
Boy, howdy. And he's the rookie that won.
Right. It's, when you come into the league as a rookie and you're heralded as the number 1 overall pick, and they brought in all of these weapons for you, and it's supposed to be all sunshine and lollipops. I mean, you still have to put in the work. You still have to develop the chemistry. Keenan Allen led in targets, 11 targets, but 4 catches. DJ Moore had 8 targets and 5 catches. I think the game was a little too fast for him. While he played a little bit in preseason, it ramped up. The running game didn't get going. They ran the ball plenty, but the guys who made the most hay were, wide receivers on end arounds and whatnot. DeAndre Swift had 10 carries, but only 30 yards. He's got to get a little bit more going. And I was probably more puzzled by the Gerald Everett out-snapping Cole Kmet.
I mean, what are you going to do? Chicago going to Chicago.
Kmet. What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to put a hit out on Everett.
I'm going to wish for Shane Waldron to disappear. Speaking of games that left everyone deflated, the Patriots went into Cincinnati, and beyond all reason, and despite being 9-point underdogs, pulled off the 16-10 victory. Dennis, the Patriots, rode Ramondre Stevenson, who had 25 carries for 120 yards and 3 receptions, and a pretty stout defense to this victory, putting up mostly field goals. But we thought the Patriots would be a poor team. We questioned whether Jacoby Brissett was the right answer. He wasn't spectacular, but he looked veteran enough here. Could the Patriots secretly be better than we were expecting?
I think it's going to
NFL better, not fantasy better.
I think it's going to depend on Ramondre Stevenson. At some point, that passing game is going to have to do something. You can't pass for 121 yards and expect to keep winning. I mean,
Caleb Williams says, "Hold my beer."
maybe that defense is good enough to keep him in a lot of games. But Tyquan Thornton had 2 catches, KJ Osborne 3 catches. Austin Hooper led him in receiving yards. So they've got some, outside of Stevenson, they have some figuring it out to do, because, Antonio Gibson was supposed to be the receiving back, 0 targets. Stevenson had 3 targets, caught all 3 passes.
Gibson was super questionable going in, though, with some kind of leg injury. So I'm wondering if they just did limited snaps.
But if you rostered Ramondre, the future looks bright. It looks like they're going to keep giving it to him. But ultimately, Cincinnati just crapped the bed. They just didn't play well.
Well, let's talk about Cincinnati. They notoriously, under Zach Taylor, have declined to play anyone in any of the preseason, and it feels like every year they roll out there and look completely inept. They only had 45 snaps on offense. Joe Burrow threw it 29 times, completed 21 passes, and only got 164 yards and no scoring plays. To be fair, he should have had a scoring play twice, but one got ruled not a catch to Mike Gesicki and one Tanner Hudson fumbled. But what are we doing with Cincinnati? They go immediately on the road now to Kansas City. This feels like another terrible start.
Yeah, I don't have high hopes for this week. Chase has some rust, not playing all preseason, holding out and doing that. I want more money and not really getting where he needed to be. Burrow had a great completion percentage. He was 21 of 29, but ultimately he wasn't able to get the ball in the end zone. Zach Moss ran well, but because they were behind, he just didn't get enough volume. There was no pop from Chase Brown. Andre Iosivas was like the darling with Higgins out and potentially Chase being limited, but he had only 3 catches for 26 yards. It's outside, it almost feels like maybe they should have kept Tyler Boyd.
Maybe. He certainly didn't make much of an impact for Tennessee, but maybe it's the locker room guy. On to what was probably the best game of the day part, which was the Houston Texans at the Indianapolis Colts, a 29-27 seesaw battle won by the Texans. Dennis, the Texans have an embarrassment of riches in the passing game. We saw in week 1, targets were pretty close, 8 for Collins, 7 for Dell, 6 for Stephon Diggs. Collins was the most productive, 6 for 117. Stephon Diggs got the 2 scoring opportunities. What do you take away from this going into fantasy?
Most weeks, I would expect the target distribution will be very similar to that. I think that it'll come down to who gets the big plays and the touchdowns, and that will be dependent on what the defense does. Do they play a lot of man? Can they match up? That may lean more towards Nico Collins. If they're playing a lot of zone, maybe Stephon Diggs or Tank Dell are the ones who kind of gets it. But, ultimately with Mixon and those 3 receivers and potentially Dalton Schultz, it feels a lot like a San Francisco situation where somebody's going to get left out every week, and you just got to hope that guy isn't yours.
Meanwhile, for the Colts, we see Anthony Richardson back out there. He only completed 9 passes, but it was for 212 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also rushed 6 times for 56 yards and a touchdown. So pretty great fantasy day. Really kept his team in it. Do you feel better or worse about Richardson after seeing this week 1 debut of season 2?
Well, as a guy who traded back in a couple leagues to because I had the 101 and my team really didn't need to draft Bijan because I was rebuilding that year in Dynasty, traded back at least twice so I could take Richardson instead of Bijan. I'm optimistic. There's going to be ups and downs. He's raw as a passer. He can make plays. He was QB4 this week, and if I can get that type of production out of him when he's, what was it, 9 for 19, 212 yards, and he's still going to be QB4. I'm going to take that. That's just, I feel like there's going to be more weeks where Jonathan Taylor is the leading rusher. Taylor isn't going to have 48 rush yards most games. He's going to be substantially better.
Like when he plays the Packers on Sunday.
Yeah. So, but I mean, they've got Michael Pittman, Adonai Mitchell look good. Alec Pierce flashed. Even Ashton Dulin made a big play and took it for a touchdown. So they have some wide receiver ability. So if Richardson can get away from the here's the pressure I'm going to run and get to here's the pressure I'm going to move and then throw it, he could end up being pretty deadly as a quarterback in the passing game while still maintaining some of that rush ability.
On to the Battle of Florida, where the Miami Dolphins hung on for a 20-17 victory over the Jaguars. A lot of interesting doings on pre-game as Tyreek Hill was detained and later released, and then worked that into his choreographed touchdown celebrations. But for Jacksonville, they had a pretty big lead, 17-7 at the half. They were blanked in the second half, so a little bit of back to the drawing board. But for fantasy, last year when Tanks Bigsby was drafted, we thought that he might have an interesting impact in that backfield and proceeded to be the missing man. Well, missing no more. Year 2 started off, he got 12 carries, led them in rush yards with 73. Does this get you excited going forward?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I mean, I think it was 5 or 7 of those carries went for 2 yards or less, including a couple negative carries. So, but not to compare him to Barry Sanders, but, that was a Barry Sanders type of thing, 1 yard, 2 yards, 0 yards, 4 yards, 1 yard, 1 yard, 77 yards. So if he can continues to get opportunities, I think he'll siphon off some of the touches from Travis Etienne. I think Etienne will be the passing down back. And then if they're splitting the carries 50-50 and Etienne is getting 80% of the running back pass opportunities, it drops Etienne down into the low end RB1, RB2 range. But it does make Bigsby flex worthy. We'll have to kind of keep an eye on it and see, they've said since they drafted him that they wanted him to have a role every week. This week was the first week that he came out and he actually executed it. So if he can maintain that, break off those 10, 12, 14-yard runs to offset those 0, 1, and 2-yard runs, I think they'll continue to give him opportunity.
Meanwhile, for the Dolphins, the backfield was something of a mess. Raheem Mostert had 6 carries for 9 yards. Devon Achane had 10 carries for 24 yards, did get a rushing touchdown, also caught 7 passes for 76 yards. But then Jeff Wilson appeared, 5 carries for 26 yards. He was the one that came in and not Jaylen Warren. But as we look at a short week, Achane and Mostert have both been held out of practice the first 2 days. What are you doing with this backfield? How are you feeling moving forward?
Well, I'm waiting until the inactives are announced on Thursday after last weekend's debacle with San Francisco.
Oof, yeah,
but I think Achane is the guy that they want to give the opportunity to, and the 7 targets kind of showed what they want to do with him. He's 5'8" and 5'9", 185 pounds. They know that they can't pound him up the middle 15, 18, 20 times. They're going to have to put him in space. Now, on the plus side, McDaniels McDaniel comes from that Shanahan tree, runs a very similar zone scheme where it does provide space for the running backs. So Achane, I think, will continue to be the guy you want to roster most out of this backfield. I think Mostert will be the number 2. Mostert will likely be the starter, veteran deference. But I think Achane will, because of his passing down work, will most weeks have the most touches. But in any given week, they've got 4 guys that they can just slot in, including Jalen Wright, who is inactive, that fit that offense, that all profiled similarly. They just a couple of them are a little bit bigger, and it's an explosive offense, and you want to have parts of it because in a 17-game season, people are going to miss games. And so I would rank them Achane, Mostert, and Wilson until we see Jalen Wright. If they start deactivating Wilson for Wright, then obviously you would move him up over Wilson. But Wilson, they brought him to Miami because he came from San Francisco and knows the offense. And every time he's been given the opportunity for any volume, he produces.
Let's move on to what was perhaps the worst game of the opening weekend, and that was the Panthers at the Saints, where the Saints got the 47-10 victory. Dennis, the Panthers looked dreadful in general, but of note, fantasy-wise, Chuba Hubbard, 6 carries for 14 yards, had no targets. Miles Sanders, who we went through a lot of the season wondering whether he was on the bubble or not, 5 carries for 22 yards, actually led them in rushing, did not have a reception, but did have 2 targets. Mike Boone also getting 4 carries there and has been, I believe, elevated to the roster permanently now. They're still going to be without Brooks for a while, but we thought Hubbard, based on last year, would be a good play back there. Do you have any misgivings after week 1?
I don't think so. I think it was just a game that kind of got away from them. They didn't run a ton. And so when you end up in that position and you're supposed to be the lead back, it can go haywire, and you just don't really know how good they are. I think it's a wake-up call for Dave Canales and the Panthers. They invested in 2 high-profile guards to bolster the running game. It didn't work last week against New Orleans of all teams. So while I'm a little hesitant about Bryce Young still, I'm not sure I'm sold on Miles Sanders being the run game savior in Carolina. But if we look back at his time in Philadelphia, we know sometimes it takes Sanders a couple seasons to get rolling.
Meanwhile, the Saints put up 47 points, scored 5 offensive touchdowns. Is it possible that they're better than we thought?
I mean, it was Carolina. I mean,
it was still an impressive beatdown.
I mean, they only ran 7 more plays than Carolina, but they had 13 minutes more of possession. So it was, they played a bad team. They had a couple big plays. I mean, I want Foster Moreau to be the tight end, but then Juwan Johnson goes out and also catches a touchdown pass. I'm a little concerned about only 2 targets for Chris Olave.
They also had a real deep shot to Taysom Hill. I don't know if you saw it. I was watching Red Zone. They had a deep shot that just barely got broken up, or he would have gotten like a 50-yard touchdown strike.
Well, I'm interested in keeping an eye on, because, it's an even-numbered year. So that means Jamal Williams is relevant. And, 11 for 38 and a touchdown for Jamal, plus 1 catch for 13 yards. he may work his
Could be
way
worse.
back into flex territory.
Well, I mean, he got 11 something points if you rolled them out there. I actually think I did roll them out there in 1 week. Desperation paid off. The second worst game of the day was Minnesota going into New York. They got a 28-6 victory. Minnesota putting it together pretty nicely. Sam Darnold, 19-24, 208 yards, 2 TDs, 1 INT, 3 carries for 3 yards. A pretty solid victory. Are you encouraged by what you saw from Darnold?
I'm encouraged by what I saw from Darnold, but then I look at the week 2 schedule, and he's got
49ers.
San Francisco. So I'm a little less encouraged. Let me get back to my previous.
I thought he had a decent game, but some of the social media chatter was we've never seen him look better. He looks fantastic. The Giants defense did not look good, and 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception on 24 passes is fine. I don't think it's record breaking.
No, but I also think with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, who I think is dinged up a little bit now, and then the game Aaron Jones played, they went against the Giants. He didn't have to be outstanding. So I think Darnold is a guy that could really use a Brock Purdy-ish type set of weapons, because he's not an elevator, and he needs to have good people. So for him, I think getting Hawkinson back is going to be huge. If Jordan Addison gets healthy and he has at least 2 very good to elite wide receivers, and if Aaron Jones can continue what he's doing, that would provide Darnold with a set of weapons that, while again, he's not going to elevate them, he can definitely get the ball to them. Unfortunately, Daniel Jones in New York, I'm not sure how many more games Daboll needs to see before he goes to Drew Lock.
Well, that was what I was going to ask. So, the flip side of that coin, they bet a lot on Daniel Jones, even more so if you watched Hard Knocks the offseason and some of their discussions in the run-up to the draft. Jones, 22-42, 186 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, had 6 carries, but for only 15 yards. I mean, Malik Neighbors got 5 for 66. Wandale got 6 for 44, so they were probably in flex territory, but do you think Daniel Jones is cooked?
It sure feels like it. 5 sacks. The O-line isn't doing him any favors again this year. And, he holds the ball too long, which leads to turnovers. And I'm not sure about Daniel Bellinger's fall from grace. I mean, I get it. Theo Johnson was a hot name, but Bellinger looked good a couple years ago, and he was 3rd in snaps. I mean, hell, I forget who the 3rd tight end was, but he actually played more snaps than Bellinger.
Not a great sign. Sign. On to the afternoon games. The Raiders travel to battle the Los Angeles Chargers. Chargers looked pretty strong at the end, getting a 22-10 victory. Dennis, on the Raiders side, Zamir White ended up a little bit better than where I thought he was going to be in the third quarter, but only 13 carries for 44 yards. Did have 2 receptions for 2 yards. Alexander Madison, though, getting 5 carries, 19 yards. The rushing split, not incredible. Madison definitely appeared to be kind of a pass-catching back, coming in early, getting 6 targets, caught 4 for 43, and a touchdown. Is that running back split getting a little worrying?
I think there's going to be a lot of game script dependency for the Las Vegas Raiders. And unfortunately, when you've got Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, it's probably going to lean a little more towards Alexander Madison because they're likely going to be playing from behind. If they can get a lead, it wouldn't surprise me to see Zamir White with 17 or 18 carries, having games like he did last year to close out the season. But ultimately, he's just a guy. He isn't a special back. He isn't great in pass catching. And I think Mattison, with his edge in pass catching, at the end of the season, I think we're going to look back and it's going to be about a 55-45, 53-47 split towards Zamir White. But Mattison will have been the more fantasy productive back because of the passing downs. It did, Minshew did what he was supposed to, I think, in the passing game, getting the ball to Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers. They just didn't produce big numbers. Bowers had 8 targets, Adams 6. And so it'll come down to, can they get more explosive plays? I don't think they had many explosive plays. Well, I guess they did have some, 4 20-plus yard passes.
Well, and it's worth noting Madison's reception and touchdown came with almost 4 minutes left in the first quarter. He was out there on the third series, and that's where his production came out of.
Well, and I can see, they're going to have to spell White, so it could be one of those situations where it's White, Madison, White, Madison. But Madison also plays on obvious passing downs.
For the Chargers, we wondered what the backfield mix would be like. And J.K. Dobbins, I think the question has always been, is he healthy enough? And he looked really good. 10 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown, including a 61-yard scamper. Also caught 3 passes. It wasn't a great offensive performance for the Chargers, but are you encouraged by what you saw from Dobbins?
Very much so. The long speed is not back, and a couple of years ago when he came back off the knee injury, we saw that he had a little hitch in his giddy up. He was breaking through the line and tearing off big chunks, but he was easy to catch. This year he's coming off an Achilles instead of a knee injury, which is the death knell for running backs. But we're seeing more and more players are coming back from those. It seems a little bit early. It feels like we'll have some missed time due to aggravation from the injury recovery for Dobbins, but it does seem like he's going to be the guy that's the back that's getting the passing down work, and he's going to get a pretty good split of the rushing work when he's tearing off big plays. But it's not uncommon to see Gus Edwards breaking off 20, 30-yard runs either. So I think they're going to run it a lot. I'd like to see Herbert get up over 30 pass attempts. But when they're playing a team they should beat like the Raiders and Dobbins is putting up 135 yards on 10 carries, that's going to be hard to do for Herbert.
On to the third worst game of Sunday, and that was the Denver Broncos at the Seattle Seahawks, a dreadful game to watch. The Seahawks got 26-20 victory. Bo Nix, rookie starter, threw it 42 times, completed 26 for a whopping 138 yards and 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. Did have a rushing touchdown on 5 carries. What did you think of Nix?
Well, his 3.3 yards per attempt were better than only Caleb Williams.
Yeah, and that was generous because he completed a couple down the field, but most of the half, his average depth of target was -1 yards, as Jaleel McLaughlin's stat line will tell you.
But if you look back at what he did in college, that's exactly what he did in college. Like, he doesn't have the biggest arm. He's got an okay arm, and if with Peyton, we're going to compare him to Drew Brees. There's just no way around it. And Brees didn't have the biggest arm. So let's look at what he can do. I think he'll be able to work the intermediate. He'll take the occasional big shot and hope that Sutton can convert it. I don't know who this Valet is, that dude.
Devon Valet.
But, giving him 8 targets, 8 catches for 39 yards.
Rookie wide receiver. He's the better rookie wide receiver. Troy Franklin was a healthy scratch.
So I like that Josh Reynolds had 8 targets. I like that Courtland Sutton had 12 targets. it'll just come down to will they be able to start converting, because Sutton only converted 4 of 12. So I think Nix has to set him up a little better. I mean, Nix did run the ball for 35 yards and a touchdown. I think they may incorporate a little more of that action into the game plan to sort of free things up. And then if they do that, that may open up some of the passing.
They shouldn't. That was the most awkward run I've ever seen in my entire life.
You can be awkward all you want as long as you're scoring touchdowns. I think we need to see a little more Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin to get those yards per carry up over 3.5 yards.
Look, I thought Denver was going to be one of the worst, if not the worst teams in football going into the season. They kind of got my hopes up with a preseason, but I kept telling myself they never played against anyone who was actually going to make a roster, and that's what it looked like in week 1. Sean Payton can all he want complain that all Russell Wilson did was dump the ball off, but this offense looked regressive with his chosen and anointed quarterback. He, pardon my language, effing sucks as a coach. His offense sucks. This entire team sucks. I cannot wait for them to get completely blown out of the water against a real defense in Pittsburgh, because Seattle was still kind of figuring things out and putting things together. And if Denver's defense had managed to swallow up a tackleless Seattle offense in the first half and force 2 safeties, this game would have been 50. This game would have been the 47-10 that happened to Carolina. No Denver fan should delude themselves into believing that this team is any better than that Panthers team. For Seattle, we saw Kenneth Walker got a lion's share of the carries, looked pretty good, 20 carries, 103 yards, and a touchdown. Zach Charbonnet did get 8 carries. He wasn't as productive on the ground, but did get some nice passes going to him, including a 30-yard touchdown strike. Do you feel like both of these guys might end up being playable this year?
Maybe. I mean, I love Walker. I think he's gonna carry the ball. I expect Charbonnet to be the guy that they use as a change of pace and sprinkle in. 8 carries, maybe a little high for Charbonnet on a weekly basis. I think ideally you probably want him to be in that range, but I don't think you can count on Charbonnet going 2 for 3 for 29 yards and a touchdown, which was a 30-yard touchdown. So the other pass was very Bo Nixian.
He might have. I do think he could end up being a little more efficient on the ground. We'll have to see. I definitely thought Walker to me looks like the clear number 1 starter, but Charbonnet looked like I might be more interested in flexing him than I thought before. I was, I obviously watched a lot of this game.
I mean, Charbonnet is a fairly talented guy. He's like Jag plus. So,
And I think so. I'll be curious to see how Seattle does. They're on the road this week with the Patriots, but they had a real rough first half. But in the second half, they seem to really work things out and figure it out. And I think that's, new coaches, new coordinators, new everything. I think they might get a little bit better. On to our next game, which was a tough beat for the Cleveland Browns. It looked like Deshaun Watson had been mentored by Sean Payton and his offensive strategy. In this game, he threw it 45 times, completing 24 for 169 yards, a TD and 2 INTs. The Cowboys come in and get the 33-17 victory. Dennis, I want to ask you about Brandon Cooks. Quietly, after week 10 on last year, where he seemed to catch fire and find some rhythm, he averaged 13.9 fantasy points per game and served as wide receiver 14 from that time on. Quietly, 4 receptions, 40 yards, a touchdown, had a carry for 5 yards, right at 14.5 points, picking up again here. Should he be a weekly lineup consideration?
Yeah, I mean, he's a professional wide receiver. He finished as wide receiver 21 this week. So they're going to throw the ball a lot. I think we've established that. This game was a blowout, so they did run the ball probably a little more. I mean, they gave Lamb a carry, Cooks a carry.
Lamb
And
got
then
3
Cooper
carries.
rushed back each carry, though Cooper's was a kneel down. So when you're giving running back or wide receivers a total of 4 carries, hell, Deuce Vaughn even got a carry. I feel like 32 pass attempts for Dallas might be their low water mark this year until they play the Giants, anyways. But no, I Brandon Cooks. See, I can't remember which order. I think I ranked him as wide receiver 48, and you ranked him as wide receiver 45, and he finished as wide receiver 38 last year. Those rankings may be flipped. And I could see him, finishing 6 or 8 spots higher than that, but it feels like around wide receiver 34 to 38 is where he'll be. If he gets, if he averages what he did in this game, that's going to put him at about 680 yards receiving. So I think he's definitely a weekly flex consideration.
Yeah, you're right. I had him at 45. You had him at 48. I think we were probably just a little too low. I did not realize how strong he finished until I looked it up. When I was looking some things up. I mentioned Watson's stat line. Now his 13th start for Cleveland. Another batch of sort of bad news and charges came out. Well, not charges, but a civil suit that with a whole new rough incident was filed against him today. The Browns can't release him because of that contract, but if you were the Browns, would you start considering Jameis Winston?
I think you have to if you want to win. I mean, it smells like toast there in the quarterback room. But I guess there is a clause in the contract that if Watson had not notified them that this could potentially come out, they may be able to get out of that contract. So I don't know how valid that is. I'm not a contract expert. It was just something I heard on the radio. So it'll be interesting to watch. But man, he looks shot. He looks like he doesn't have any confidence whatsoever. His 3.8 yards per attempt was just above the aforementioned Bo Nix, who was just above Caleb Williams. So
I mean, he studied a lot of Sean Payton game film, a lot of Russell Wilson game film this offseason.
He's I mean, when you got Njoku and Judy and Amari Cooper, you should be able to get the ball down the field. It was not great.
Let's not include Judy in that. And Njoku was also injured, so that'll be worth watching. They tested out some tight ends today, which I took to be a somewhat grim sign. The last of the day games saw the Washington Commanders at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Buccaneers looked great, winning 37-20. Jaden Daniels ends up with a couple of rushing touchdowns that made it look a little bit better than it might have. But the passing game is what I want to talk to you about. We saw Jamison Crowder get a catch, Olamide Zaccheaus get a catch, Terry McLaurin only 2 for 17, Luke McCaffrey 3 for 18, 3 for 28 for Zach Ertz. Austin Eckler ends up with 4 for 52, and Brian Robinson 3 for 49. I think we thought Terry McLaurin would be a pretty good wide receiver 1 here, but do you have any reservations about the passing game after week 1?
No, I think that, it's a rookie quarterback making his first start. The Buccaneers defense is, I think they're top half in the league probably. They've got some guys that can get after it. So they ran it 16 times with Daniels. He's fast, but he doesn't take hits well. So I think that Kingsbury is going to want to try to figure that out to keep him from taking some pops. But, Robinson had a decent game. You don't want the running backs leading the team in receiving. So I think they had 4 guys with 4 targets, one of which was McLaurin. I think that's going to loosen up a little bit. He had a good completion percentage and over 10 yards per completion. So those metrics looked fine. He's just got to start to get the ball to the playmakers on the outside instead of going, to Ertz and McCaffrey over the middle and Zacchaeus over the middle and, Crowder over the middle and Eckler over the middle and Robinson over the middle. Once they get away from that and they move the ball, it's going to take a couple big plays to build confidence. I think Daniels will be fine. He's going to get there.
You know what's going to build confidence? Going home to face the Giants. For Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield picked up very much where he left off. 24 of 30, 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, ran 3 times for 21 yards. Were we too low on Baker?
Not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would say. We had him ranked at 20 and 22. And they played a questionable defense in Washington. I know they got a new system with Dan Quinn there, but a lot of the same players. And that's a team that last year gave up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks in the NFL. So they've got to continue to grow as a team. Baker's playing well, no doubt about it. Jalen McMillan has stepped up and taken control of that wide receiver 3 job there and looks really good. Godwin playing in the Cooper Kupp role, seemed to click pretty well. And then Mike Evans doing Mike Evans things. So I'm sad for my guy, Cade Otton. And then Bucky Irving.
Cade Otton real good this time, I think. He was kind of boom or bust a little bit last year too.
Who was?
Cade Otton.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think he'll get it eventually.
Baker's, we had him consensus QB 21. His ceiling's probably 15 or 16.
Well, he's QB 10 last year. We'll see how he does. Week 2, they're at the Detroit Lions, so maybe a little bit different to see what they look like. Speaking of the Lions opened at home on Sunday Night Football. Gave us our first overtime game of the year, winning 26-20 over the Rams. For the Rams, Cooper Kupp, 14 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown on 21 targets. Puka Nacua injured his knee and was lost for the game by halftime and will now go on IR for 4 weeks. With that combined with what we saw from Kupp, is Kupp back to being maybe, Super Bowl year Cooper Kupp?
Maybe. I find it hard to believe he's going to get 21 targets a week. That would be insane.
He kind of did that year. They won the Super Bowl.
So, I feel like he's probably going to be more in the 14 or 15 target range. Tyler Johnson looked good, filling in for Nacua. Who's the other cat? DeMarcus Robinson.
Yeah.
7 targets. And then Jordan Whittington, he had what did he have, an end around? How did he scored, didn't he? I don't see him listed there.
He did. Came back on.
He got I think he got a big first down on an end around.
It came back on a penalty.
So
in 21, when Cooper Kupp was Offensive Player of the Year, he saw 191 targets in 17 games. So that I'm going to do the math real quick, but that I think is more than. You're right. That's 11 targets a game.
He just catches most of them.
Yeah, he had 145 receptions. So, be interesting.
Yeah, 14 receptions for 110 yards. That's what, 7.5 yards a pop or something?
7.9 was his average. I kind of liked their replacement tight end too, Colby Parkinson. He saw 5, caught 4 for 47, had a couple of nice plays.
Yeah, he looked real good. So the Rams have a good team. They've got a powerful offense. We'll need to see Kyron Williams getting a little more production out of the running game. And we'll wonder if, we're going to have to put Blake Corum on a milk cart and see if we can find him.
I mean, he was returning kicks. They said he was going to do that. I'm not shocked. The rookie running backs for the Rams do not typically have a big role early on. We shouldn't have convinced ourselves that he was any different. They took Cam Akers in the second round. He still didn't do anything at the beginning of his rookie year.
I mean, second running backs for the Rams don't typically have a big role, regardless if they're a rookie or not.
Ronnie Rivers got 2 carries for 16 yards and no targets. So, for the Lions, we've been waiting for a healthy full season from Jameson Williams and wondering what he could do. We got an answer to that. Week 1, 9 targets, caught 5 for 121 and a touchdown, including a 52-yard bomb. Also had 1 carry for 13 yards. Are you encouraged by what you saw out of Williams?
I am. He definitely had himself a breakout game. He's going to be the number 2 in Detroit. It's still going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, but like every team, there are games when the stud just doesn't have the production level. Again, it's another team that has a plethora of weapons with Laporta and Gibbs and Montgomery and St. Brown and Williams. Somebody's going to get left out every week. Unless they're scoring 70 points like college teams, somebody's getting left out. This week, it just happened to be pretty much everybody but Jameson Williams. But Montgomery had a pretty good game, and so did Gibbs. But
on to the final game of the week, Monday Night Football, where the San Francisco 49ers won 32-19. The big surprise was about 90 minutes before the game when Christian McCaffrey was declared inactive. A little bit of back and forth covering when they interviewed Jordan Mason post-game. He said he was told on Friday night he would be starting, which is a real blow for fantasy owners and also would be a real violation of NFL protocols. Kyle Shanahan walked that back in post-game and said he told Mason to be ready in case on Friday night, but they did not make a decision until Monday afternoon. Either way, a Monday game where a player of that caliber that you were not expecting to miss comes out, I'm sure that damaged a lot of fantasy teams. For the Jets, they didn't look that great, but Garrett Wilson, 6 for 60. Breece Hall had a decent game, but Allen Lazard, seemingly back from the dead, 9 targets, caught 6 for 89 yards and 2 touchdowns. That despite a horrendous drop on his first target of the game. Are you starting to buy back into Allen Lazard with Rodgers back?
So this was the most fantasy points Allen Lazard has scored in his career. He has 2 other games in his 7-year career now, over 20 points. If I were, in Vegas at a casino and was able to put money on this being the highest fantasy scoring game of Allen Lazard's career, I would say yes. So Lazard, unfortunately, his relevance is going to be tied to Mike Williams' health. So Lazard's probably going to start 9 games. Mike Williams is the far superior talent. He just can't stay healthy. He played 9 snaps in this game. He's working his way back from injury. But when he's out there, he's the better player. Now, Rodgers is all about chemistry, so I think there'll definitely be some influence there. But there'll be pressure from the front office to play the guy we went and spent money on, Mike Williams.
I mean, Lazard is the guy they went and spent money on too. He got a giant deal year before last.
So
he has the bigger cap.
Lazard feels like you're playing whack-a-mole if you're trying to put him in your lineup to win games. It may come down to him. He may take that job from Williams and end up being consistently productive. I still think Garrett Wilson is the guy you want to roster there, though unfortunately for Cole, last night it didn't pan out as he was going up against Aunt Beth. lost by about 2 points. He needed about 25 points from Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson and just didn't quite get there.
Yeah, Alan Lazard is actually the highest paid wide receiver on the Jets. He's making $12.1 million. Well, Garrett Wilson, 5.6, Mike Williams, 2.7. I think it is worth noting, too, Lazard's 2 touchdowns were kind of fluky. One was a free play where it looked to me like the 49ers secondary stopped a little bit, thinking that they had gotten that play killed. And then the other one was that garbage time touchdown that Tyrod Taylor kind of threw up for grabs. So I do think he'll have a role, maybe have a flex position role, maybe have the role that we thought we could get from Malachi Corley. But I'm with you. I'm not expecting 2 touchdowns every week. For the 49ers, Jordan Mason steps in, 28 carries, 147 yards, and a touchdown. Also caught a pass. What do you think of Mason? It looks like he's a guy that's capable of carrying a workload and returning results if McCaffrey has to miss.
So before we move on to there, I just want to bitch a little bit. I lost by 1.13 points, which I should have lost by a lot more, but the dude had McCaffrey. And he took McCaffrey out and he put in Braylon Allen. So I was ahead. And Braylon Allen with his, where'd it go now? His one rush for 8 yards. And
one catch for
9 yards. I lose by 1.13 points.
That's a bad beat.
I should have lost anyways, but that stunk.
Well, I didn't even have options to replace McCaffrey in a couple of places, and it never occurred to me he was going to be out. That kind of pisses me off because the whole time they had said, well, he should be good to go. And
right. Yeah, I mean, I had a team where I left
Ramondre game at
my bench
8 Eastern and look at it and like, right.
Anyways. Back to Jordan Mason. So aside from him and Shanahan needing to get their story straight about when he was going to start, Mason came into the league as kind of a meh prospect. He had a fair athletic profile, fair relative athletic score, ran like a 4.58, so he wasn't super fast, didn't have great agility scores. He's got good size. He just happened to land in an offense that if you can make a decision, plant your foot and go, you can be productive. And that's where he is in San Francisco. I don't think that he's going to replace Eli Mitchell. If Mitchell is healthy, I think Mitchell will slide back in as the backup. Certainly not going to replace McCaffrey. But if McCaffrey's missing time right now, I think you go ahead and you fire up Jordan Mason. I don't think we expect him to get 28 carries going forward, but I mean, they gave Debo 8 carries as their backup, in part because they didn't think Garendo was ready, so they used Samuel as the backup running back. It's a situation where you're buying the offense. Yeah, McCaffrey is a change, a rainmaker player, but you're still buying that offense regardless of who's in there, as evidenced by Mike Anderson and Olandis Gary back in the day.
Well, before we get out of here, let's talk about the Thursday night game, the 1-0 Buffalo Bills at the 1-0 Miami Dolphins. Josh Allen injured his left non-throwing hand, but x-rays were negative, and he has been cleared. He is not on the injury report. That is some good news if you are a Josh Allen roster. But what are you doing with the receivers? Is there a receiver you're starting? And I'm going to include tight ends like Dalton Kincaid in there. Are you still firing up Kincaid this week?
Yeah, I think you've got to. He's still going to be – I think he ends up at the end of the year being the guy that leads them in targets. Keon Coleman was wide receiver 46 this week, and Khalil Shakir was wide receiver 25. Shakir is still the guy that I want. I think he's – from the wide receiver position, he'll end up leading them in catches. He's a dynamic receiver. I think Coleman ends up being a good red zone threat, first down threat, making some big plays. Maybe Coleman moves into a top dog role next year. But again, I think from a fantasy perspective, we're expecting Dalton Kincaid to kind of slide into that Travis Kelce style production, that's lofty expectations, and it's gonna leave us wanting a lot. Again, the bigger issue is that Allen only threw the ball 23 times, but he targeted 10 different players and completed passes to 9 different players. If you're going to have a wide funnel like that, that's going to really be a struggle for fantasy.
Meanwhile, we talked about the Dolphins ailing running backs Mostert and Achane were both been listed as non-participants for the last 2 days. You'll need to watch injury reports tomorrow and Thursday leading into the game. Both officially listed as questionable. If either of them plays, do you still feel comfortable playing them? If neither does, would you go with Wilson if you got him?
So didn't we have a game last year where Achane was coming off an injury and, we were all, after his start, we were all hot and bothered for him, and he had like one carry.
Well, he got re-injured.
Yeah. And so I think if you roster Achane, it's hard to think you've got better options if he's active. But we also know that if they put Jeff Wilson in there, or if they put Jalen Wright in there, that they're going to be productive also. So it's really, I hope it's a situation where they're either out or they're in, because if they're active and, you start them and they roll out and Wright for, 18 carries and Jeff Wilson for 12 carries, you're just going to end up beating yourself up. But if he's playing, I think even Mostert a little bit less so, but you almost, it's almost impossible to not start them.
I am taking the Dolphins.
So I went back, I did week 1. I went with my initial quick and dirty picks, had a 10-6 week. There will be some changes, I think, in week 2 based on injuries and things like that. But I initially did pick the Dolphins, and I'm going to stick with the Dolphins.
Yeah, I went with them because they're at home. That'll do it for us today. We'll be back on Friday. We'll look at this Thursday night game and preview the rest of the week 2 slate. Hopefully get you ready for your fantasy action. If you're looking to kill some time in between now and then, though, Dennis, what can the people do?
Go to their favorite podcast platform, type in the search bar and select the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast, and give us a like and a subscribe. We're going to be talking football twice a week all year long. We very rarely miss a week. I mean, shit happens sometimes, but, we're here talking fantasy.
Well, it is finally a night without an NFL game, so do your wife, your kids, anyone in your household a favor. Let them pick what you want to watch tonight, because if you're like me, those people that share a house with you are probably tired of you putting the game on. Give them a choice for a night. That way it'll feel much more magnanimous when you take it back on Thursday for the prime game.
Oh, that sounds awful.
I will see you guys on Friday. Have a wonderful evening.